it's difficult to teach somebody a thing, to do a thing, and to teach them how to teach the thing at the same time. Those are three. This is the curse of role-playing rulebooks, really, right? Because you're actually trying to do all three at once. If the goal, as you stated kind of beautifully, really, is to take a group of people who are willing to play a role-playing game with you, they know has something of a learning curve, but are not inclined to make this a marriage, and even if they might consider that for the future, if they have fun, they're seriously not into an enormous live together for 2 years before the marriage process, right? I mean, and I can see their point. I mean, you mentioned a friend of yours who kind of, just called it as soon as he saw the manual.
Just couldn't get it.
And and I've run into that too. I mean,
but I mean, he's so steeped in D&D and that approach, just any D20 approach, that he just couldn't get 3D6, what?
Yeah.
I tried to explain the bell curve and the benefits of that, and I mean, just everything just whoop. And then I said, there's stun, there's body,
right? As soon as the variables proliferate,
right? There's killing attacks, there's hand attacks, and he's just his eyes started spinning.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Part of it is that, and this is one of the sources of paralysis, is the fear of making a suboptimal decision.
Right.
Is a big part of this in a lot of people's minds. And the truth is that historical role-playing has been very insensitive to this. I mean, in fact, to the point of, in many cases, saying there are suboptimal decisions because you need the chance to fail. Right. That's part of what we do here. Some people find that entertaining or kind of Sudoku puzzle-like. Oh boy, I get to figure out how to make it go. And other people are like, forget it. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't taste good, I don't want to eat it. So I see that. Well, this is kind of a tricky example for that, because I actually think Champions is beautifully set up not to screw you.
Right.
But it's hard to see that when you have umpty-ump points to plug in math and advantage and limit and that shit. So okay, let's get right to it. My suggestion is, first of all, that just as in the alpha thing, you make those two statements, and it's dictated. You're just like, I'm making the two statements. We're not gonna debate it. We're not gonna negotiate it. We're not gonna process it. And so if that were the case, and knowing that fortunately you don't have to please anybody but yourself,
right?
Because you're kind of inviting people to do this with you. And if it were any other role-playing game, that would already be fixed, or many, many role-playing games, it's totally fixed. So what's the difference? Right. If you dictate it or if this book dictates, it's the same damn thing. Just, So what would it be? The first statement has to do with what powers are like. It could be a visual statement. It could be a thematic statement. It can involve heroes and villains socially, or it can involve the powers as, special effects. But the point is, it's any such statement. It could be qualitative. It could be technical. Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, off the top of my head, I've been kind of thinking about sometimes heroes are bad guys.
Right.
Kind of
excellent
theme I've been kicking around in my head.
Right. Let me play with a couple of a good.
And maybe there's fun bad guys or good guys.
Right. There's some fun phrasing with this. You could even just say it straight like that, just as so straightforward it could not be mistaken. To state it perhaps more cleverly, you might say something like, good is not always nice, and and bad is not always wrong, or something like that. Some clever.
You are the good guys, and you are the bad guys.
Yeah. So good, we've got that settled. Then we take sort of, I hate to call it a genre statement because that is just the worst word, but the sort of story, what sort of story statement, and usually that's best thought of in terms of human problems. Is this a story about, kinship and loyalty, or is this a story about, thrilling dangers that we face? Stating it in that fashion is really helpful because it doesn't dictate how they turn out.
Right.
When you say a genre statement, usually that includes dictating how it turns out, and that's death. So, right. So in that sense, any thoughts on that?
No. Maybe we could talk it through, though.
Sure.
I've always lived in a small town, and nothing ever happens in a small town, right? But I think it also gives you maybe a closer view of the crossover between good guys being bad or bad guys being good.
There's a lot to that, yeah.
Type of smaller scale, right? But I don't know if that really fits.
It could. It actually could pretty well. There's some interesting thoughts, and also one of the fun things about this is, one of the really fun things about this is you can always try.
Sure. Right.
Some of the most bizarrely successful stories in media have been in completely unlikely,
right?
And if you pitched it to somebody, they would say it would never work. But if they watch it or read it and they love it, they say, "Oh, this was brilliant."
Right.
So okay, let's work with that a little bit. Maybe something along the lines of, small town, big secrets, or something like that. Yeah. And if you were to pick a place that you actually know really, really super well for this purpose, what comes to mind?
I grew up outside of Des Moines, Iowa, and that actually has some, has some possibilities.
Let's do it.
Des Moines now is getting to be a bigger and bigger city, but it's still not what you would call what people would look at as a huge city. So that might actually be sort of fun. It's not a huge location.
Yeah. I completely agree.
In the suburbs and things, but let's go with that.
Excellent. So with that in mind, you've got these two statements, and you can just slap them down.
Right.
And one of the fun things that really helps when you are just presenting things to people and you want to keep it relatively snappy, you could pick a comics artist / title that you like and your set of visuals and say, it looks like this. Doesn't mean it's exactly this character or exactly this kind of story, but it looks like this.
Right.
And that can, then the paralysis comes in when people say, okay, now make up characters.
Right.
Sometimes people are already spitballing by the time you're done talking.
Right.
By the time you said small town, and I'm thinking sometimes heroes are not good, and all that, all sorts of things. I'll tell you what came to mind immediately. I got them already. I'm actually ripping off a visual from an artist that I worked with. But he had a real burly character called Bad Dog. and I had thought a lot in the years since I worked with the guy, how would I write Bad Dog? And I really liked the idea of this kind of anti-intellectual bruiser who really does just want to, kick back and drink his beer. But he is really into, we're keeping this place good, a good place to live. And so the wrong kind of developer, the motorcycle gang, whatever it is, he'll pound it, and he'll pound it good, and terrifyingly enough. And then the whole dog thing kicks in. Like all the dogs in the vicinity are like his. Right. And if you think about that, that's actually a little creepy, right?
Yeah.
So, but then so I'm kind of like he's sort of anti-cool. He's not Batman cool at all. He's a redneck. He's a good old boy. But so I'm kind of getting this idea. And then I had the idea of, okay, maybe there's like this, he's obviously got any number of restraining orders on him. He's obviously got, he's a well-known local troublemaker. I don't know if he has a secret identity or not, but regardless, definitely got a checkered history. So he's got maybe if not a parole officer, at least somebody that the state has assigned to him.
Right.
And this person actually, they're all right. They like him. And they're kind of like, together, he and I can do some good.
Right.
Right. So I'm not even saying this guy's the social worker person or whoever is a mastermind who manipulates them. But together, they've got kind of a cool perspective on things.
Right.
And so, and I can kind of see it going both ways. Sometimes our down-home local teaches this intellectual a thing or two.
Right.
And other times, the intellectuals, like, you got to understand how these developers work. He's not, he says jobs, but, and so they can kind of like help each other that way. And so I'm getting this, you can see my head's exploding with this. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the things that I was kind of thinking about is that secret identities are going to be like especially hard in a small town, right?
Right.
You can't just leap up and run out of church. Or
exactly.
whatever, and go, you're like the one person who's not there when you stop the falling tower, or, whatever's happening.
Right.
Eventually, it's going to be pretty easy to figure out what's going on. So,
that's an interesting point. Well, it'd be kind of interesting. What if you don't care? What if you do have a secret identity, but you don't care if the town knows? It's everybody else. It's the world at large.
Well, yeah,
the whole town's invested in your secret identity, right? Who? Right. Who? We have no idea.
What if Superman never left his hometown?
Right. Everybody knows that it's him.
Everyone knows, right?
But they're not going to tell anybody from elsewhere. Yeah. So
so sometimes secret identities are not so secret or something,
So all you really need is one person spitballing like this, and I bet if we had three people sitting here, all these other ideas would be popping into place. Number one. So if not, and if you want to be super prepared, then you can actually have 3 or 4 half-built characters.
Right. Now, that's kind of what I was asking about originally, was this idea of doing one-shots at a convention or something, and how effective this could be.
It's tricky,
you're sitting around talking, you're going to spend a good chunk of time doing that.
It's really a bummer at a convention when that happens, because you hear all the time about, well, we spent 3 hours making up the characters, and we had just enough time to meet the manipulative NPC who was supposed to give us our mission, but then we had to go. And I would suggest that if you do any kind of pre-generated work, the three-cornered concept is actually very easy to screw up, because if you make up too much of any one of the corners, then you want to make them like merge or something. And so it's kind of, I think I'm going to let that be a development, a work in progress. What does a unfinished pre-generated handout look like for this game? And the only thing I can say is it needs to be exciting. A person could look at it and say, oh, is this person happily married, or is this person in a bitter divorce?
Right.
And or you can say, okay, now we still don't know if we've already got this and that disadvantage, but are their powers going to cut out sometimes? Or are their powers going to have a crazy side effect sometimes? I would say in whatever you do build in the disadvantages, go big on one variable. We have a character in the San Antonio game who, by my suggestion, is susceptible, vulnerable, and dependent on the same substance. And my argument was, why not just go big?
It's alcoholism, right? That's a heck of a great.
Exactly. Why not go? Why diddle around?
Right.
Why not, if you're going to have a cool substance that your character's powers depend on and it's problematic in every possible way, go big.
Right.
And the same thing kind of goes for a few other. So I'm talking about these pre-generated characters. Go big on a variable. Another character, it's possible to have both a public identity and a secret identity. Mm-hmm. It is possible. Go big. Get both.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you do that in every corner, then I think you're onto something. Right. Then you could say, okay, now how do we fill it in? And you can probably,
even if it's, I suppose, like them just saying a short statement about their character and how they're picturing it. Even you don't have to fill in all that much, except for how are you going to play this? How do you see this guy playing? How do you see this going?
Exactly. And if you wanted to, you could scribble that in and like give it point values, like after the first session. The powers are, if you're going to be completist on any of those, I would say anything technical about the powers, because you don't want people sitting there coming up with advantages and limitations.
Just on the spot. It's just not.
Unless they do so spontaneously, in which case write it in, and for God's sake, don't explain it.
Right.
Just say, okay, that's another 12 points. Let me just scribble that in. And they're like, wait, what? And you say, never mind. Never mind. I got it. So those are sort of my thoughts on the pre-generated notion.
Right.
If you don't have pre-generated and you have people working the three corners from the start, which could happen, then I would suggest playing next time. Right. And completing them individually, because historically that's what I've always done. We do have our individual ideas, and then we complete the character later. I've never, ever benefited, no game I've ever been in of Champions has benefited from somebody just showing up before prep, or before hangout, before we get together with their character and slap it down.
Right.
Just completely in isolation. The trouble is they're doing their comic now.
Right. Exactly.
And in many cases they've actually pre-written what they want to, even for how things are going to go. The big fear I have, or the one thing I never do after a couple of experiences, is to say, hey, we're playing Champions, show up with your guy.
Right.
It really, if you do it the way I'm talking about, one person with a killing attack and one person who hates killing actually are still seamlessly matched and will strike sparks off each other.
Right.
But if we do it the way that I just said, where they show up with no interaction or no connection with anything you've said, that's when you have your clashes, your bad clashes.
Right.
So let's try it. I got going on the bad dog guy. Now you're the GM, and you will have done this already for the way we're talking about it. Given what you said, and never mind my character's idea yet, who's a serious bad guy? Who is like the worst of the worst? Or some different spins on worst of the worst that suit these statements?
Huh. What, this is kind of bouncing off what I was saying earlier about being in church. What if the minister was actually up to something? A person who is actually doing good for the community, but is actually, dipping in the till, but actually it goes deeper than that.
There's a lot of different ways to nail down one corner and let the other one go bad. There's,
right.
For one thing, we could be talking about a very difficult kind of adversary, one who is completely normal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in many ways, it's a lot easier to take down your hypnotist, mind control, religious, demonic dude, it's actually easier to take that character down than it is a completely legitimate, straightforward guy who you consider to be negative to the community. Now, so that's an interesting question right there. I mean, because we're thinking about social situations, or we could go with a very interesting situation with, with more of a powers orientation there.
Right.
Right. So,
well, the hypnotist thing kind of becomes interesting then, right? The preacher who's like really effective at bringing people, into his church and things. I mean,
it depends on just how, deconstructive you want to be. What if the poor guy's totally honest?
Right. What if he doesn't realize he's doing it?
He's a believer, man. He just does. So anyway, it's really, you can see that your mind is kind of going in all the different ways this could be.
Right.
But it raises a lot of very interesting ideas. Another character that comes to mind just by hearing you talk like this, it is so easy to create a caricature of religious characters.
Right, exactly. Right.
Whereas one thing, did you know that back in the 70s, after the initial Ghost Rider series, and before kind of the Ghost Rider became a very beta character through the 80s of no interest whatsoever to anybody. And then in the 90s, they did sort of that whole reboot thing.
Right.
But I'm not going to talk about any of that. Going all the way back to the 70s, when the character genuinely started off as a Satanism dabbling biker.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
As after the first story was completed and the character sort of got into a few more ongoing stories, the author, who at the time was Marv Wolfman, said, he's going to be a Christian. He's not going to be like a crazy dude. He's not going to be like a table thumper. He's not going to be a pain in the ass. But he will be, given his background and his experiences and stuff, given his culture, why not just have him be a standard, not a mainstream Christian, a hillbilly Christian.
Right.
But it's not weird.
Right.
It's just, Katie Pride is Jewish. Why can't this guy be be Church of Christ? Why not? Right. And now, granted, this was the 70s, and things got a little out of hand. Jesus in a biker jacket did show up. He was called the Friend, right? This did happen. Granted, but the basic logic I thought was sound.
Yeah,
the basic idea actually wasn't really all that crazy. So it actually sort of amuses me to come up, as a not very religious person myself, but why not play it straight and have the person not be bonkers and not be an idiot?
Right.
They just happen to play a faith that I don't happen to have, but I'll treat as a character. Right? It's kind of an interesting idea. So as you can see, different people are grabbing different ideas as we talk. And so with this coming to mind, but you see, this is where it's useful for you to come prepared with a bad guy or two. And a better way to put it, I say bad guy and it sounds like villain of the week. Who do we stomp? Right? And it could be that simple. You could simply say, yeah, let's go ahead and be stereotypical. And it depends on you.
Corporate farming, boo, right?
Right, yeah, that, or you could be even more Hollywood stereotypical.
Is taking over.
Yeah, or you could have that, or you could have, the biker gang who are actually a bunch of, cannibalistic aliens. And they show up, right? And keeping it nice and easy like that. Either way, what you said or what I said, keeping it nice and easy like that. There you go, right? You said the corporate farming, right? The Monsanto android shows up,
invading the zombie bikers who are invading or whatever.
Sure, so. Yeah, and so you have that kind of ready to go, and therefore the hunters and stuff that they come up with, you kind of have to, I would say those are the things you keep, if any of them are inspiring, go ahead and have them leave their calling card in the guy's mailbox. Just to have them be in the picture. But don't try to come up with any of the hunters or anything like that in detail right away.
Right.
And especially not if you're going to jump in and play. Just
be ready to flexibility, right? That's easy for them to fill in later.
Well, spit but it's good. It often is very helpful for them to come up with an idea for it, and then you happily, spitball it a little bit in play, but don't make it the major thing. And so that way they feel validated for what they came up with, and by that point, if you have a good time playing with these people, they're going to say, you're going to go home saying, all right, it's time to make up that dude because that looked fun. Right. So to get back to kind of the easy peasy side of all this, I think that playing that day in the life way that I talk about in the document is a really good idea. And it doesn't even have to be long. 15 minutes of simultaneous play. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Oh, it seems to me like you'd be here. Either way. And then this is where the skill is. Most of the time, GMing skill is about manipulating people so that they all end up at the warehouse at the same time. And then the good players are complicit with this or compliant. And they're like, oh, well, what, I followed the clue, right? Never mind all that stuff.
Right.
Instead, in this case, the GM skill is in playing the non-player characters as people who they recognize you. The people at the table. Yeah, we start to recognize them. We start to say, "Oh, I get that guy." In that San Antonio game, one of the characters is campus security. He flies around. And it struck me, then they have a deal with the university and stuff like that. And so he has a nominal boss who is the campus security guy. And it just came to me that this guy would be kind of a no bullshit, but, kind of he's been doing this for a long time. And he really likes having this super character there. And cuts him a lot of slack because he knows the regular rules aren't going to work very well. And so it seems like he's this really good guy, but he also has some weird attitudes. He's older, so for him, it's all about protecting the innocent girls on campus.
Right.
So it's hard for him to understand that party girls aren't they don't deserve it. So he's got kind of his good side and his not so admirable side, but whatever. But he's not a jerk. He, if you said that to him, he'd probably blink and say, "Oh yeah, you're right." It just doesn't occur to him. So I played him I played him like in the first session, and really fast, everybody got the character and kind of liked him. He's got his blind spots. He's got his, he's got a point of view that they don't always agree with, but everybody at the table gets him.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I have in mind. Go ahead and if you play people honestly, you'll see the other people at the table totally, they're like, okay, I see. People will even start inadvertently playing him or her with you. When you're playing the character, someone else at the table chimes in with how they talk.
Right.
And then you're good. You're good. That the whole, the GM plays the world, I play my character thing starts to bleed a little, and nobody notices. Right. And that's some good stuff. So I would say that's the GM skill that matters more than any other. Right. Because for your first session, if you just got the, stage left, in come the cannibalistic alien bikers, or stage right, down comes the Monsanto android, to terraform the fields, or whatever. And the contract wasn't signed, but he's doing it anyway, and all that sort of stuff. That if you've got that ready to go, then just a few minutes doing the day in the life.
Mm-hmm.
You actually you're ready to just run into. Then everybody's going to find out whether this freaky battle map game with its turn modes and all that is going to be any fun.
Right.
And that's the last thing I want to talk about.
Right.
Because I've played a lot of champions, and so have you, and sometimes that's so much fun. Yeah. Sometimes the choreography of the fight is so much fun. And sometimes it is the deadliest, awfulest, I will never get those hours back, you know. And so what's the difference?
Right.
And do you have any ideas?
How engaged you are imaginatively, right? And that has to be storytelling and not just figures sitting and, okay, next.
Right, yeah.
You know, people usually blame the speed chart as being the source of the problem, but I just don't see it that way.
I agree.
It has to do with how well you narrate what you're doing as you're doing it, and how involved it keeps everybody at the time.
There's so many little variables that can come together nicely, and one of them is that rule that no one ever notices in Champions 3. I don't know if it's in the previous texts. I don't have 1 and 2 memorized the way I have 3 memorized. The thing with third is that one little lovely line which says, if the description of the action is cool. Bonus.
Yeah.
Bonus. I mean, literally a bonus. Add +2, you know, +2 to hit.
Yeah.
And it is really out of place in the history of role-playing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at if we line up every freaking role-playing game as a rules summary, you know, in time, that would be like a little like pinpoint flash of what would light up.
Sometimes in games and in terms of rewarding experience points and things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was really well played. You give us some more points, but
a bonus in the moment,
affecting the gameplay, you know, that's significant.
Yeah, exactly. Without any physical justification whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it really ties into the love of comics that permeates these texts.
Right.
And so let's think about a couple more of these things about the love of comics and certain other details. One of the things that the game offers is ways to beat the chart, beat the speed.
Right.
And the worst of them is the most common, which is the held action.
Right.
That's the one that's such a pain in the ass. It just stalls everything out. Yeah. Whereas the ones that I like actually are the abort to defense, particularly if you permit defensive actions that help others.
Yeah.
And so that comes to mind when we can back up a little bit. What kind of powers really help to break people in? One of them is missile defense usable for, I mean, it's not usable against others, it's usable for others, you know. So yeah, missile deflection usable for others. And you could either have it for a character with movement powers or actually have it usable at range. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you've got somebody who's got little floaty discs. Right, floating around. And, you know, there they go. They abort an action to a defensive maneuver. And it's and you can use a defensive power. It's right there in the rules. Right. So you abort your next action, but bam, you just kept that thing from hitting the dude. Yeah. And that kind of thing really goes a long way.
Yeah.
So
that's the stuff that got me so thrilled about Champions in the first place. Like, what? I can actually choose like different types of maneuvers. This is awesome, right? Yeah. And I mean, I don't have to just wait for my turn and then that's that. I can actually preempt a turn to do something now. Just the possibilities are so incredibly rich.
They really are if you use them and don't just wait for your turn.
Right, exactly.
And the GM does not make the mistake of saying you have to wait.
Right.
What you have to wait for, the way I always put it, and I haven't written down yet in the manuscript, but the way I always put it is that the speed chart is your character's attentive reactivity.
Yeah.
So that means that if you've got a speed of 4, you don't have the reactivity to get something off on your own yet. But you do have your standard reactivity. It's just going to use it up until the next one. You know, if you go now, that means, okay, that's fine, but you're going to have to, wait until your head gets back in the game, for the next one. And
I'm trying to describe it as like when you stumble and you're going to fall, but you can't do anything about it just yet because you're still trying to process that you're falling.
Right.
And then at the last second, you can sort of turn or whatever and try and absorb the brunt. But I mean, there's that moment where you can't really. And it's just not you don't get to act yet, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're still getting it together, and that really helps because if you think about it, it's the ability to manipulate that or get on top of it that tells the story in combat, and that's why in Champions now I want the hits to hurt,
right?
And I want the attack's commitment to drain you. I want the endurance to hurt, so that 3 or 4 actions in, who's stunned.
Right.
Who aborted to defend and isn't being covered by a friend? Who's looking at their endurance and going, get out of here or stay in?
Right.
If you have these uncertain contingent things going on by the end of the turn, near the end of the turn or at the turnaround of the turn, then the combat is not going to be predictable. And people can see, it's really shocking to players if they're used to certain other games to realize that the way the fight turned out really had everything to do with what happened in it.
Right.
And you, as the GM, could not dictate the outcome.
Right.
And that floors people. They've never seen it. In many cases, they've never seen it before.
Right.
That the end of the fight was not taped.
Right.
And
losing, although it sucks narratively, it just might lead to something better.
Exactly.
Right? It doesn't mean like, oh crap, you just lost the game.
Right. And particularly if you point out, if you go ahead and use those 0 phase monologues and presence attacks, if you go ahead and use those and encourage them to do it, you can get them. The old joke, you got me monologuing, right? Find out where the villain is about, right? Go ahead and challenge where you think they're coming from. Go ahead and, get them sounding off about, about what their beef is. And that actually can be, and then when you get your ass stomped by them, you're like, all right, yeah, but I got your number now. Right. And so, if the fight goes badly for the characters, it's always good to play them turning it around through investigation or interaction or deduction, and be ready to go. They're like, all right, we're on it. We're going after this guy. And you're like, okay, next session. But I think that that's really where to come from with the that's the mantra. What do you do? What do you do? If they've aborted for a current defensive action, then that's the only time they can't answer that question. That's the only time that they're kind of stumbling around getting their head together. Otherwise, no matter what phase, no matter what segment, you can say, what do you do?
Right.
And even if they're not eligible for an attack, that doesn't mean they're completely helpless. And so I think encouraging that the speed chart is a good indicator of your character's ability to collect themselves, having committed, but it's not a lockstep. They're not imprisoned in it to suffer and wait for their turns. And God, the freedom of talking.
Yeah.
The freedom of commenting. One technique from a game from the early 2000s, which was called With Great Power. It's been through several versions, but the first version had a cool thing. And the guy even made a prop. And so he called it, the rule was called the thought balloon. And it was a modification of the champion's monologue rule, which was any time anybody can, grab the thought balloon. And what he said in the rules was go like this. and say whatever it is your character is thinking, anytime. Right. And takes no time, just go ahead and do it. And when I played with him at a convention, he had actually come with a little dowel rod that he had made a thought balloon on and taped it on there, and you could just pick it up and hold it over your head and do the thought balloon, which is, hilarious. Now in Champions, of course, it can be a word balloon or a thought balloon.
Right.
And that's fine. But even using that as a technique at the table, maybe not even explaining it, just like putting your hand up and saying, he says this. By the way, that didn't take any time. Any of you can do that anytime.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
People might respond to that.
Is trying to keep that from kind of devolving into everybody just has a snarky comment, about, that reminds me of that thing that one time.
Right. Make sure that you're saying that this is the character talking, and I think you can probably do that. And again, you can kind of suss out the table for its own attitudes. That day in the life play, that can get people out of asshole mode. Out of just MST3K mode. Get them out of that mode. And another way to put it is that it's real easy to make fun of standard tropes or even cliches. But if they sneak up on you and you're participating in them, even the most cynical comics or movie person will cry.
Yeah.
They're all suckers for it. They just don't want to admit it. And so, oh my God, the robot was his daughter. So I don't know. I mean, I hope does this help a little bit? I mean, with a game this complex, if you say, what do you do? There's no wrong answer. The game is robust.
Yeah.
The game is incredibly robust to adapt what do you do into action. And if it so happens that what do you do is just not going to land it just isn't going to land immediately, then so be it. Or if you say, okay, I give it everything I've got, and you say everything, I mean, to the point where you are endangering yourself by doing this, and the player's like, yeah. Okay, go ahead, burn the endurance, roll the dice, take it up to 10 plus and beyond. Right? Go ahead, and you're going to enjoy the spectacular outcome of that energy blast or of that punch. Right. And then you're going to say, and you go face down. Yeah. You'll get a recovery next time. You'll get a recovery. Don't worry, you're going to get up, but you go face down. And don't even worry about warning them beforehand, because then they go into strategy mode of whether they want. No, forget all that. Let it happen. Let them go face down. And, but let them know the system is robust. It will punish you for overreach, but it will do so in a comic booky way. You're not going to bleed out from, overextending your endurance. That's not going to happen. I think that could go pretty well. You kind of got to be super GM in terms of the distance modifiers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know your own preferences. How battle mat-y are you?
Oh, I love battle mat, but I think, like you're saying, for the first session or so, when just kind of getting everybody introducing themselves and talking about what they do and things, it's just not necessary.
My take is usually to have one in my head, but describe it all naturalistically. Yeah. Like across the street or down the block. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, that's like 20 hexes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. There's the old Warhammer player, and he wants to know exactly what the distance is. And that's, that has its, it's fun, like we were saying earlier, but it also has its own inherent problems that you're already starting to strategize.
Yeah. What I found, too, is that it's so coarse-grained in Champions. A hex is 2 freaking meters.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say about 20 feet, you're not going to make a mistake. That's a lot of wiggle room in that hex. You can give or take 5 feet, and that's okay. So I found, since the hexes are so coarse in terms of the fictional space,
Right.
you actually can be pretty wiggly, and not the players don't have to trouble themselves with, okay, 1 more foot, 8 more inches, 8 less inches. Right. And that's a whole bonus gone.
Oh,
it's like
my half move only gets me there, but I'm still 2 feet short.
Yeah, that's not going to happen in Champions. You get to the hex and you've got 6 or 7 feet to play with right there. And the same thing goes for distance mods.
Yeah.
Because those are 3 meters. 3 hexes.
Yeah.
3 hexes is, that's a long freaking way. Yeah. And so you're kind of like, all right, well, if we're talking about 10-foot chunks to go American, right? 10-foot chunks. And I love to use football because a down, right, is 10 yards. Okay, so 5 hexes-ish, give or take a little more for the rounding, right? And if I'm thinking in terms of the football downs, I realize, I'm in great shape for delivering. You can say, yeah, you're going to get it, that it's going to be a little harder to make that shot to the player. And if the person is really, really, if the person's really like hung up on their bonuses and stuff, you can say, yeah, you're going to take a penalty on that. And they say, oh, really? What if I jump a little closer? Okay, jump a little closer. Minus, and then you're thinking to yourself, okay, -1, he moved, but that's, la la la. Don't worry about it. Last thing. I am apparently atypical as a Champions GM. You know how somebody says they roll and they say, okay, I hit DCV 7.
Oh, yeah.
I hate that. Everyone does it.
Me too.
I hate it. Yeah.
Me too. I could never get into that.
Yeah.
That rhythm.
What I do, the rhythm for me, is that I know the DCV. Mm-hmm. All I want to know is their OCV and what number they roll. Mm-hmm. And I'm good because I've got all the modifiers in my head.
Yeah.
I've got the modifiers. Maybe if I were smart, I would have like little counters that I like move over, from this side to that side, just move over all the little counters, and I've got my minuses right there. And so, if I was smart, I would do that. But I've got that, and I've got the number. All I need is to know what they're coming in with and the number they roll, and I complete the algebra from that end.
Right.
That's what works for me.
Modifiers in your head. So.
And as it turns out, that works better for beginning players because that way they've got that number and they've got the number they rolled, and they don't have to do anything. Right, and so I would preserve that. That's a good time saver. The champions' heads at the table, they want to complete the equation themselves. Right. But the people who are coming in to see what this wacky game is like, they don't want to do that. So yeah, that's. If you had been a GM who was inclined to accept that kind of verbiage, I would have had to say, back up on that, do the other half of the work for them. Don't make them complete the OCV, DCV equation. But since you're like me, do that. Do that.
When I was first playing us, we all knew what the DCV was. We knew our OCVs. We just had to do the math quick. And I understand why they changed it, so you don't automatically know what the DCV of your opponent, right? But strategically, everyone figured that out after about 2 or 3 rolls. Anyway.
Right, and besides, I tend to be a little transparent. When in playing fantasy games, after a requisite, unless not knowing the map was important,
right?
There were times when I would just put out the floor plan. They've been around a couple of corners. I'm just putting out the floor plan now. And if your character doesn't know it,
fog of war is fun, but it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to map.
There's also the fun thing, which is true, and it's neither better nor worse, but it's true that nobody can play a character's ignorance of their surroundings better than that player.
Right.
And sometimes, and it's a little shocking to people who say, no, the character doesn't know. It wouldn't be right if I knew. It's a little shocking to them, but sometimes, at least after a little while, like once around the office building, right. You just put out the whole floor plan of the office building, and they're like, yeah, well, my character doesn't know that's a broom closet.
Right.
And they're delighted when the character yanks open the door and they're like, oh shit, it's the broom closet, you know. They knew it. They're okay, but they really, really enjoyed setting up their own character for not knowing it. That can happen. Right. So, but anyway, so yeah, being a little easy about that kind of thing, I think, is important. Otherwise, you're carrying too much in your head. You can't explain all the options to somebody while you're managing the outcome of all the options at the same time. It's just deadly. So I'm just trying to think of some of the philosophy of, you know, how you play it. And go ahead and, you know, apply the penalties. You know, don't give them a break. Part of the game is, you are down the hall. You are going to have to decide whether to burn the endurance to get faster to hit him. You want to hit him with your move through? He's way down there.
Right. Well, how boring would comics be if everyone succeeded in everything they were doing all the time?
There's even a section. He was talking in mystery advantages, mystery powers, but this is a more general concept that Aaron Alston wrote about in one of the supplements in Champions 3. He said one of the things that really was irritating him in playing Champions was that no one ever said, I don't know if I can make it. I don't think I can make it. You know, and tried anyway. He was like, now how can I make that happen? He talked about the mystery powers and stuff, which is fine, but it's better, or it's more commonly available than maybe he realized when you remember the edge case of endurance. Right. Will you knock yourself out by burning it to get there for that move through? Because if you only even have one little endurance left, you can pull off your full strength move through, full speed and full, you know, move through. But if the die roll goes the wrong way, you're gonna go nose first into the floor, you know, instead. You don't, I mean, literally, you don't know if you can make it.
Right.
And the game system, there's just enough little rules in there that actually make it work, make that possible. And that's why I think it's cool to have an environment for combat. Really think about, I mean, maybe it's emergent where it all comes together, or maybe you have it planned, either way. But really using your knowledge of the region, because playing in a big city where everybody knew the big city is awesome, because you're in Daily Plaza, or you're in, you know, Millennium Park, or you're in the underpass or whatever, and everybody's just pulling in the environment left and right. If you can get that kind of thing going, where you can say, okay, yeah, you're perched on that stoplight, and they're in front of that store. And the person's like, well, I don't think I can make it. And you're like, you can if you burn some endurance, but you don't know if you're really going to make it. You might conk yourself out. They say, I go for it. But it feels very real because of the naturalistic description that you're going in with. You know, or a person says, yeah, I'm going to pull out of my spin. You know, he knocks me back. I make my acrobatics roll. I pull out of my spin and I fly up. Well, I'm about right here. Well, I'm on this street light now. You know, even without a perfect map of the area in everyone's head, you know that there are streetlights there. Yeah. So, you know, okay, you're on that one. And I think that can go a really long way. There's, for the perpetuity of our Champions game, the dent in the sidewalk in front of the administration building at the University of Chicago, created by the slam the ground, you know, strong guy. I don't think I ever fixed that dent in the sidewalk as a GM. I think we played our entire game, session after session after session, wherever it took us, knowing that dent was still there. And because it was the first moment that the player felt like they were there.
Right.
And so whatever it takes, I mean, with your experience in play or your sense of enjoyment of the game and its unique properties, whatever you do to cultivate that, that's almost more the priority than it is getting every bonus right. So anyway, that's the best I can say. I mean, if the NPCs seem to be embraced, if characters find their voice, one player like snarks another character, and then the player of that other character kind of gets that delighted look of, oh, we have that relationship going on between our characters now, or the missile deflection thing I was talking about.
Right.
The interesting thing, oh God, I'm still riffing on stuff. One of the nice things about psychological disadvantages, choosing if you're going to set up stuff, don't set up psychological take it back. Don't let them set up their psychological disadvantages for semi-pre-generated characters, because they're a great teaching device that if you have no irrational response, it's a psych limb, but it's not irrational, and you don't melt down, then it's really just points for characterization.
Yeah.
And strongly held opinions. And you can say, yeah, your character can hold that opinion, but doesn't mean you're an idiot. You don't take a swing at somebody just because they're not a vegetarian. You don't, collapse in a heap. You dislike spiders. But no, you don't collapse in a heap. Right. So it's the opposite of what I was saying about all the other disadvantages. Interestingly enough, not going big with the psychological ones is a good idea. That way they characterization, they can enjoy it. And if they do get irrational about it, you can just up it for the finalization of the character.
Right.
Looks like you're pretty intense about that one. Everybody look out. Bug them about this, they'll go off on you. All right then, 5 more points. And so yeah, that's kind of interesting. So maybe the psychological limitations are the ones that you allow to be wiggled, until we find out where we're at. I've often thought the first session of Champions should be a mulligan. That means everybody is allowed to go and rewrite their characters after the first session.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done that, but it's a good idea. That way you can take away some of the anxiety for the people who really want to finagle every point. Right. They can,
I got it all wrong.
Yeah.
It sucks. Right.
Yeah.
Just rewrite it. It's okay.
Well, and what happens in the comics after all?
Right.
Even in the most continuity obsessed creators are not like continuity obsessed fans. Even the most continuity obsessed creators shrug and say, well, yeah, not that time. Yeah, I know we wrote it that way, but it doesn't count. It just doesn't. So yeah, that's an interesting idea as well. Anyway, seem helpful or?
Yeah, definitely. It's my brain going on all these
excellent
options.
So you said you had some people in mind.
Yeah. Cool. We'll see what happens.
Please do. Yeah, so, but it was really, really nice talking with you, and it gave me a mental break too. So, really interested in seeing how this goes, and and I know they're a slog. But watching at least some of the Champions Now videos of play that I've posted at Its Play, just take a peek, like just randomly even, like go to the middle of the video and just see.
Right.
I'm not saying that the way I do it is supposed to model it for everybody, but there are certain strengths of what we're doing. And you can see people there's one person who used to play old Champions, and a couple of people who are really new to this whole idea, just really new to it. And watching their faces, it was just like back in the 80s when the flying character zooms down and like he'd even like worked on his grab. He even upped his grab and skill levels because he really likes grabbing a guy and swooping off of them in the previous session. And so swooped down on the dude who'd created the field of hallucinations and swoops down on him and grabbed him and like, I'm doing my barrel roll and going straight up with him. And I was like, yeah, he comes up with you because his growth kicks in. He grows like 4 levels of growth, right? And all of a sudden, you said you were grabbed? Well, guess what? You said you were grabbing? You did. Now you don't like it, right? And so, and the guy, of course, used his power and backhanded him with all the strength you get from the growth, and sent him careening across the detainment center. This was Immigrants Detainment Center, Texas, right? And so, careens across the detainment center right into the guard tower, and just watching the looks on the players' faces, and it's like, it ain't like taking 3 points of damage from the goblin, is it?
Right.
It's
exactly. Yeah.
There's a. I hope you experience that. I hope you experience that again, because there's something about the game, and I'm hoping to preserve its logic in the redesigning I'm doing that you guys haven't seen yet, because I'm into beta.
Right.
And I'm hoping to preserve a great deal of that logic while eliminating more and more and more of all those weird little crufts that we've all had to struggle with over the years.
Mm-hmm.
If I can preserve the logic of how that happens, then I feel as though I'm really keeping my eye on that ball as I mess with the rules. So, but the more people who enjoy it and play it as we go, the more I can concentrate on that properly. So, good luck with it. Let me know how it goes. Feel free to post there, about it. Bad, good, whatever. So, pleasure again. I hope we get a chance to talk again. This was fun.
I do too. Yeah. I do too. Thank you.